Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. How are you today?
All good, sir. On this end, the UK is the right weather for this time of the year, and we are enjoying that.
Oh, good. We've had rain, heavy rainfall in Lagos. And it's
wow.
a bit chilly, actually. So, a reversal of temperature.
Oh, fantastic. All right, sir. I'll go straight into the questions. And last week there was a question that was asked, and I'm not sure we answered that. You said you were going to look into that, and I'd put the question again to you, sir. And the question was regarding the decision by President Biden to have ground troops in Somalia, something that his predecessor had withdrawn from at the time he was president. And someone asked the question, what is your take on the position President Biden has taken with Somalia compared to what he did with Ukraine, where he said no troops on the ground?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for reminding me. I did check on it, and the questioner was right. Somalia has presented the United States with some issues of decision making. What exactly do they want to achieve by having boots on the ground in Somalia, especially after the Black Hawk helicopter was shot down and they lost lives there? Remember Clinton, well, I think was the one in power at that time. He pulled the troops out. Obama brought the troops back, but just a contingent, just to say we have a presence here. Not enough if problem really arises to make a difference. Then Trump pulled them out, and now Biden has brought them back. And I think it's necessary for us to provide that background, because it can then give us some inkling as to why. I believe that returning them, by Biden, returning American troops to Somalia, has more to do with the Chinese rather than the African continent itself. And when you transpose that to what the Americans are doing in the South Pacific area, it's almost like wherever the Chinese are going to show an active presence, we, the Americans, cannot afford to ignore. And I suppose that is what is behind sending the American troops back to Somalia. Again, I think just about 100 or so. Not enough if Somalia blows up, they can easily be extracted. And in any case, they are not new troops to Africa. Actually, they come from, you know that the United States actually has a base in, is it Djibouti? I think it's in Djibouti on the east coast of Africa. And so they'll be rotating troops from there. So the questioner was right. And I think we now have something that gives us the yardstick by which to interpret American action, not only in Africa, but really all over the world. Wherever the Chinese show face, America is going to show face. Wherever the Chinese have a naval presence, with naval task forces, the United States is also going to put in naval task forces. So whatever you can do, we also can do. And so you see, the activism of the Chinese is actually getting the United States to reevaluate strategic decisions, which it has taken earlier on about, withdrawing into its military shell and concentrating on the home front. When I say home front, I mean that includes South America and NATO area. Now, even expansion is starting to take place, and not just, going back to the status quo ante.
Thank you for that, sir. While we're still in Africa, maybe we should take a question in relation to the African Union and some of the news that is coming out now, particularly regarding Ukraine and the war that's going on there. And this is when we had the challenge where for the African Union, sir, we said that they were quiet. A lot of African nations have been quiet about criticizing what is going on in Russia. What is your view, sir, on the African Union now rising up and wanting to go to Russia to play that sort of mediator role?
I mean, really, I think that the war in Ukraine has really become Russia versus NATO. And from the very beginning, it has split the OAU down the middle. The AU has no unified position on the war for reasons that too long for us to get into here. Because each individual African country has had experience with Russia that has determined its role, its position on the war. Most of the South African countries remember the Russian support for them during the anti-colonial struggle. And don't forget that, unlike us in West Africa, who got our independence on a platter of gold, in the Southern Hemisphere, Southern African Hemisphere, they paid for that independence with tears and blood. And they remember how critical Russian support for them was. And to that extent, they've been hesitant in not criticizing Russia. Whereas on the other hand, those in West Africa and, for some, there are Russian troops in their territories. Mali, for example, to safeguard the independence and territorial integrity. Central African Republic is another one. So those, again, have a military relationship with Russia. But those of us on the West African side, in a way, it is the AU position on boundaries, that boundaries inherited at independence must not be tampered with. There must be no military operations to change the boundary inherited at independence that seems to have conditioned their position in criticizing Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. And the Russians seem to have understood. In fact, both parties seem to have understood the delicacy of the war for Africans. My understanding is that the president of Ukraine has sought to speak, to address the African Union. And who knows what will happen tomorrow, I believe, because the African Union is having its summit in Malabo. I think it's starting next week. It's starting tomorrow. Who knows whether it will be on the agenda, whether they should allow Zelensky to address them. Russia, on the other hand, from what I've been told, was actually the one who invited the chairman of the African Union, who is the president of Senegal, to come to Moscow to try and be a peace facilitator. I don't think that Ukraine has signed on to that. Anyway, the visit hasn't taken place. But you could see that Russia is not inviting South Africa, that is its ally, its closest ally. It has sought to adopt a proper position. Senegal is chairman of the African Union. So it's like, I'm not picking for the Africans who will come and talk on their behalf. And the president of Ukraine has also been clever. I want to address the African Union. After all, there is a precedent. He has addressed the American Congress, the British Parliament, the European Union Parliament. So I'm not, he will say he's not taking sides. The AU is made up of both those who are pro-Russian and those who are pro-Ukrainian, and etc., etc. So that is really the situation as it is.
Someone is saying here, sir, and I'll just paraphrase this, that to what extent would South Africa's position compromise the stand that the AU may want to take with Russia and Ukraine, in fact?
No, it's, as I said earlier on, the war in Ukraine has split the Africans down the middle. I think in the last vote at the United Nations, about 34 voted, 34 votes, 34 African votes went into the neutral box. And then the rest, the 20 or whatever it is, split between those who were pro the United States and the others who were pro Russia. It will have been helpful, and I think I've said this on this program several times. It would have been helpful if those resolutions at the UN were not labeled American inspired, orchestrated resolutions, because it then means that if you vote for a resolution, you were pro the United States. And if you voted against the resolution, you were pro Russia. Whereas the reasons for those votes were different from one nation to the other. It would have been helpful if those resolutions had been midwifed by peace facilitators rather than one of the protagonists in the struggle. The UN is there as a platform for peace facilitators who are medium powers to use to try to diffuse critical war situations. It hasn't been helpful that resolutions brought before the UN have been identified as being midwifed by one of the protagonists to the war.
There's another question here, sir, and this person wants to know your views about the stance that the United States is taking on African nations that support Russia. And I think they're referring to a bill that was being put forward to, in effect, punish any African country that aligns itself with Russia. So this person wants to know what your views are on that. And secondly, linked to Somalia, this question is saying that the United States should have provided support to the existing groups on ground rather than sending their own troops there. So those are two questions that people want to know your views on, sir.
Well, yes, there is a resolution before the UN Congress to punish African countries which are perceived as being pro-Russia. But it's not only African countries that have been targeted. I could remember at the beginning very abrasive messages sent to India for its position on the resolution at the UN, because it refused to criticize Russia. And both Washington and London were quite abrasive, in their comments and in their demands. And of course, India pushed back that they were an independent country, a sovereign country, and they have their own reasons for doing whatever it is that they will do. I will also ask, the people on the platform to recall, whether it is true or not, we don't know, but the president of Pakistan, Imran Khan, said that the reason, he didn't say the United States, he said the reason a foreign power engineered his being removed as prime minister of Pakistan was because he went to Moscow at the beginning of the war, and that this was perceived as being pro-Russia, and that is why they engineered this the impeachment vote that removed him as prime minister. So there is no, but I think having learned their lesson in the pushback they got from India, they've taken it easy with African countries. And in fact, if you look at, I think there have been 4 resolutions that had come before the UN General Assembly, and I don't know how many that had come before the Security Council. And really, most of the African countries have simply moved into the neutrality box, into the neutrality corner, not voting for or against, or some simply abstained from voting at all. They didn't want to be caught in between the two superpowers. As regards the second question on Somalia, no. The factions, the military factions on the ground in Somalia, I don't think you will want, if you were the president of the United States, you will want your troops to be tied up with any of them, because even the military under the command of the central government is also a faction. It's not a national military as we know it in most countries. You asked me a question last week, drawing my attention to the fact that, and a president, the new president in Somalia was there 4 years ago and was voted out, and now he's been brought back in. So there is this kind of yo-yo politics in Somalia, and I just believe that even if Nigeria were to be asked to put to subscribe to African troops to take part in peacekeeping operations or peace enforcement operations in Somalia, it will not be tied to any of the factions. That would be suicidal, because it will mean that your forces will then become targets of the faction you are not tied up to.
Thank you, sir. Let us go to Australia, where we again are seeing quite a lot of change. There's been a new prime minister elected there, who has met with the US president while the US president was on his tour of Asia. But there's something I want to call your attention to, sir, which the new prime minister said. He said the visit aligns with what his government sees as the 3 pillars of Australia's foreign policy. 1, our alliance with the United States, our engagement with the region, and our support for multilateral forums. Do you agree with him on those 3 pillars on which he wants to hinge the foreign policy of the Australian government?
He has no choice. Any clever prime minister of Australia would anchor its foreign policy in alliance with the United States, number 1. Number 2, he doesn't have any chance. He's located in the South Pacific area. And if you want to talk about, national interests in terms of concentric circles, obviously the closest geographical zone to Australia is the South Pacific. And let's call it spade a spade. He's talking about China, Chinese presence there, Chinese policies, and the extent to which those policies will affect the national interests of Russia. Australia. And when he's talking about signing on to multilateralism, he's basically telling you that Australia cannot afford either to be non-aligned or to be neutral, simply because of the activism of China. Yeah, I mean, if you want to live in an area where there is a superpower, and you want to have some modicum of independence or room to maneuver, you have to look for safety in organizations that have other states where you can then find safety in number. I'm surprised that he didn't put on a number 4 policy, because that, in fact, is the major change, and that is climate changes. The former government emphasized the need for Australia to take it slow with making changes in its fossil consumption. Whereas during the campaign, the new Prime Minister was emphasizing the need for that it is in the interest of Australia to sign on to this need for climate control, climate changes, go slow on coal, and look for non-fossil sources for energy and what have you. That, to me, in fact, is the most fundamental change between the last government and this government. But presumably he could subsume that under the rubric of multilateralism, since we had the Paris conference and the agreement in Paris on climate change. You had the conference in Scotland, again, where countries devoted themselves to making changes. And there is a 3rd conference coming up in Cairo in 2 years' time that will then enable him to make pledges, to sign on to pledges that will help us, the whole world, to breathe better. The situation is changing, not only drastically, but against the interest of humanity, the way climate change is. The temperature is going up beyond, and the UN has warned that soon it will get to a point where the damage to the continent will be irreversible. You are going to have island nations, whether it's in the Indian Ocean or in the Pacific Ocean, which are just simply going to disappear under the waves. And then a lot of coastal cities are simply going to disappear if we are not careful.
One other thing we saw on the trips was President Biden launching what he called the Indo-Pacific framework, economic framework for countering China and China's influence in the region. And so there were a few things that he said were the 4 pillars. He talked about trade, supply chain, energy. He talked about infrastructure as well. And then together he talked about tax and corruption. But sir, when we look at the initial countries involved, are these countries the right ones to be there? And tackling these 4 areas, is that enough to really counter China? So we had New Zealand, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, surprisingly, India included as well. Are they the right countries to be in the framework? And is what they're doing going to be enough to really counter China?
I will answer your question this way. I say, given the system of government that the United States operates, the problem for any administration in the United States is actually the American Congress. A few illustrations. We've had it all over the world where the government comes to a conclusion that for the sake of strategic interests of even the United States, it needs to supply weapons to a particular country. And all it takes is one senator to veto that program, even after the money had been paid. He vetoes it, and that equipment, the weapons, then are warehoused. China is not going to have that problem if you go to China and you need equipment, you need weapons in order to face an issue of your own internal strategic and security problem. So, or you want to sign a trade deal, which you've come to the conclusion that because you are facing China, that trade deal needs to be favorable to, say, Philippines, or New Zealand. And again, because of the trade unionists in the United States and their influence on their senators, they protest that this is going to mean loss of jobs in the United States. That treaty could be held up for only God knows how long, maybe until, and then before you know it, there's a new presidential election and another president comes in. So really, to me, the problem for the United States in confronting China is not going to be China or the nations in the South Pacific. Is likely to be Congress itself. Of course, it's a smart move. Perhaps it's a smart move than instead of saying this is in the interest of a particular country, Fiji, or it is in the interest of Singapore, for you to say you are doing it because you are confronting China. That way you can get the proposals through Congress. So it's we just have to watch and see. We just have to watch and see. But for the countries in the South Pacific, I think now they are going to play the role of the bride, the sought-after bride. They'll be courted by the Americans. They'll be courted by the Chinese, and they may even succeed in getting things from both sides.
It's a question here, sir, which I just the team just checked for me, and this person says, what are your thoughts on the plan by the EU to build a major gas pipeline linking Nigeria and Morocco? And I think they're referring to a plan to build this pipe gas line. I think it was in 2016 or so was when that originally came up. Russia, I know, has been reaching out to Nigeria to want to invest in that project. What is your view on that, sir?
The plan view that Nigeria is in Nigerian strategic interests. Because see, Nigeria is not even an oil-producing country. If it comes to that, Nigeria has more gas than oil. So that really Nigeria is a gas-producing country. And it is in the strategic interest of Nigeria to look for as many outlets as it possibly can, to export its gas to. Using, now, see, there are two pipelines that we're talking about, and I think we should make a distinction between the two. One is by sea, through Lagos, from Lagos, even if it makes a stopover in Morocco before then going through the Mediterranean to Spain is the closest port to Morocco. The other one they've been talking about is through the Sahara. I will vote for the one that goes through the coastal route, the coastal pipeline, simply because of the activities of the terrorists, the jihadists, the instability that the instability that characterizes the Sahara Desert, the Sahelian area. They could blow up those pipelines at any time. It means nothing to them. Whereas the coastal line is easier to protect. But to me, it's a good idea going for both. Because Europe is going to be gas starved. However, you are going to be caught. If you don't play your diplomatic game very well, you are going to be caught between the what are we going to call it now? The resources diplomacy going on in Europe right now between Russia and Europe. In fact, I'm surprised that because I heard you say that Russia is in favor. I cannot see Russia being in favor because the gas that will be coming from Nigeria will be to diminish the to diminish the Russian gas that will be going to Europe, is to diminish the dependence of Europe on Russia, because this war now has led to accusations being made that Russia has now been playing the aggressive gas aggression, or aggressive gas diplomacy in turning off his gas in order to starve or to punish Europe because of the sanctions against Russia. So Nigeria will be an alternative, not in supplement to the Russian one. It will be as an alternative.
Thank you, sir. There's a question here, sir. I hope I get this right. What this person is saying, sir, is that there is, when we look at how Turkey is trying to take a hardline role in terms of its negotiations with Sweden and Finland and their application to join NATO. We see Turkey trying to negotiate hard there. What would be the leverage for the AU in any sort of position they may want to present for whatever position they choose to take in the situation that's going on between Russia and Ukraine? So there are two questions in one from what I can gather, sir. What do you think about Russia's, Turkey's position, playing hardline? Secondly, what is Africa's leverage when they are having conversations with any of the key stakeholders in the war that's going on?
I mean, I can see the nexus between the two. But since we've separated them, let me adopt that procedure. First of all, the AU position on the war between Russia and Ukraine is not formalized. It's not concrete. They have divisions among themselves, and these divisions will have to be sorted out before you can even say there's an AU position on the war. But as a peace facilitator, the AU, look, regional organizations are too unwieldy to be peace facilitator. Too unwieldy. But to show a presence, one in Russia and two in Ukraine, it's like when the United Nations Secretary General went there. I come preaching peace. Now, what constitutes the peace is usually where the details of the devil comes in. But to say, I come preaching peace, and that should be acceptable to everybody, as long as you then don't go beyond your brief. And to show you how dangerous the situation is, look at the slap down that Henry Kissinger got from the Ukrainians and from the Europeans too, for that matter, when he proposed at the Davos conference, I believe today, that Ukraine must be prepared to sacrifice or to surrender. Let me be neutral in my own terms, to surrender some land to Russia in order to come to bring this war to an end. And Ukraine said, point blank, that sounds like appeasement. And it then made it slap down ad hominem. It made it personal. You are Jewish yourself. And when the Jews were running away from the Nazis during the Second World War, and you were looking for a place to find exile, there were people, appeasers, who called on Europe to make appeasement by making sacrifices to the Nazis. I mean, that if you were Jewish, you will know how much that will hurt. So that shows you the sensitivity of the situation. And the Europeans, there are European states who felt that Kissinger's intervention has not been helpful. That if somebody starts a war and you compensate him by giving him, surrendering some things to him, which he can then claim to be victory, he will get hungry. And the next time, he will go after another nation and then ask for compromises, for compensation, and what have you. So it's a delicate, tricky situation. To me, even each time, tricky situation, to me, even if the EU is going to be a peace facilitator, it first of all the EU must, at the summit level, agree on what will be the package that they will be carrying with them, because both parties now are angry, very angry. Ukraine is being destroyed to the level, and I don't think Ukraine is in any mood to hear anybody talk about making compensation to Russia. And in any case, you will be putting yourself smack bang against the position of the United States, NATO, European Union. So the AU, to me, is not going on a peace-making trip now. It first of all has to get its own package sorted out, argued among themselves, and be careful about who then takes the package there.
Thank you, sir. Let's go to the United Kingdom, sir, and let's look at one issue that has come out, and this is the fact that some hackers have released some information about the Brexit negotiations, which a former head of UK foreign intelligence has accepted and concurred that those were true. But, sir, to what extent will releasing such information damage the United Kingdom, since they're already out of Brexit anyway? What is your take on that situation, sir?
Well, I mean, I don't know whether it is possible to damage the United Kingdom more than it has damaged itself. You have a government that threatens to break international law by reneging on the terms of Brexit, that especially on the Northern Irish hard border or soft border. You have a government itself that one cannot trust its word. You have a government that takes refugees, and packets them to Africa, even though these refugees are not from Africa, which marks of racism. Then even though militarily it has been upfront, and one should grant it that to them in terms of weapons to Ukraine, but in terms of taking refugees from Ukraine, its performance has been abysmal. So really, what more can you really do to Britain to wash it clean by releasing details? But diplomacy is best performed in an atmosphere of secrecy. If an ambassador thinks sending a cable to his headquarters and telling the truth about the nature of the cable which has been accredited, and he thinks this cable may leak, it may even do more damage. So ambassadors, diplomats are going to become careful in what they write in those cables. Now, that does not mean that communication will come to an end. No, there are things called diplomatic bags, which have immunity. They cannot be tampered with. And they are usually carried by a diplomatic agent, usually a diplomatic clerk. And in those bags are usually the heavy things. So I suppose now ambassadors will depend less on cables and write long reports that will go with those bags, so that hand to hand, that will be safe from from interference. But it's only in cases where there is an urgency to be conveyed by the message that you will then take the risk of a cable, which, as I said, would then be subject to the activities of this fellow. And you will recall, let me remind you, that about 2-3 weeks ago, you asked about the WikiLeaks fellow, where the judge has said he should be repatriated to the United States. And I said I supported that because of the damage that he was doing to diplomacy by cracking the codes, releasing the cables, and damaging relationship. And for what? If there were benefits to the human community that comes from that, I will understand. But these hackers, rather, yeah, they are crackers actually, but these hackers are just doing this for the fun of it. For the fun of it. Now, I mean, if the hackers are coming from Russia, yes, there is a state policy to that, or they are coming from Washington, there's a state policy to that, and you could say these are the objectives. But when this is just being done for the fun of it, to show that it can be done, then, I mean, it doesn't help anybody. But it doesn't bring diplomacy to an end. It doesn't.
Thank you for that, sir. Let me pick one last question. And this is going back to some comments by the president of Belarus. And this is where he had expressed concern about the West and said the West was trying to dismember Ukraine. But more importantly, sir,
sorry, the West was trying to dismember Ukraine or to dismember Belarus? Which one?
No, they were trying to dismember Ukraine, that the West was trying to dismember Ukraine. He accused Poland of trying to seize land in Ukraine. What is also referred to, sir, is that under a non-aggression pact signed in 1939, just before the outbreak of World War II, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union carved Poland up between them. Most of the territory seized by Moscow is now either Belarus or Ukraine. And the question here, sir, is there a historical fact that he's trying to point us to here about the structure of that whole area? And does it indeed mean that maybe part of Ukraine actually belonged to Russia? What are your views on his position, sir?
No, I think he's being clever by half. He's just trying to be, look, it is true that before the Second World War broke out, there was that pact between Russia and I don't even remember Russia and Germany that carved up, and transferred territories, all over that place. At the end of the Second World War, there were agreements that were signed. Some of them addressed towards recreating or towards correcting the Nazi and the communist, land and population problems created in that area. But as we've discussed in this program, Central Europe, if one were to go back, to the Treaty of Westphalia, which actually grounded the creation of states in Europe, if we were to go there, there would be no correlation at all between the boundaries of the states created then and what you have now. Now, if you say, Prof, don't go that far, all right. How about stopping at the First World War and look at the boundaries of states that are created after at the end of the Treaty of Vienna, at the end of the First World War. And you compare that, you transpose that to the boundary of states now, no correlation. All right, let's not go that far. How about the Second World War? At the end of the Second World War, what did the boundary of Europe look like? So these are, if you like, signposts in Central Europe. Treaty of Westphalia, Treaty of Vienna, and of course, the Yalta Agreement, marking the end of the Second World War. So to just pick up one of these, and I say it's just being mischievous. There is no doubt that there are boundaries and population all over, all over Europe that could claim that they don't belong where they have been put. We saw that, and you saw what happened in Yugoslavia. The war of, what will you call it, the war of secession in Yugoslavia after Tito died. Look how many people died. All in an attempt to have ethnic cleansing. Look how many people died. In fact, there were concentration camps in Yugoslavia that started to look like the concentration camps of the Nazis, all in an attempt to have Serbia, Montenegro, all separated. Then, thank God, you had the peaceful separation of the Czech, the Slovak, and the Czechs. That was peaceful, but that also led to separation of the state. So for the president of Belarus to seek to pinpoint that Nazi communist pact as something that is relevant to what is going on is just being mischievous.
Thank you very much, sir. We have run out of time, and I will stop the program this evening. We will be back next week, just having a quick scan. There's a question here, which I'm not sure we'll be able to take today, but I'll get the team to research it, and if we can look at that, we'll bring it back next week. This person wants to know your views about India building a military base on the coast of Africa. But between that question, I've not been able to get the team to give me enough data to confirm that. So I will bring that to you next week, sir, unless you want to take it now.
No.
Okay.
Because that's news to me. I know that the Chinese have a plan in the Gulf of Guinea to build a military base. They have a plan in the Indian Ocean around Djibouti area to again have a base. Those are the two that I'm aware of. India, I've never heard of that. But we'll look into it.
Yes, sir. Usually the team will tell me and do their research before I pass the question to you. So apologies to that viewer. I just was not able to get the details on that. But thank you very much, sir, as we come to the end of the program. And thank you to our viewers. Thank you for the questions you put forward. Don't forget to like the website, subscribe to the website, and please do share the link when you get the link for the program. Good night, sir.
Wakanda.